I do believe that scientific findings genuinely and strongly influence targets and ambition. After the Paris Agreement, the IPCC was asked to produce a report on 1.5 degrees global warming. And that came out in 2018. And that's when the first time the IPCC said that in order for us to keep global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees, we need to reach roughly net zero emissions around the mid-century. Now, just 3 years after our report was published, already as many countries had net zero emission commitments around mid-century that accounted for close to 90% of global emissions. So I do believe that science is very much influencing targets, and this is just the national governments, but also close to 1,000 cities also were shown to have similar targets as we showed in our last assessment report. But also regions, companies, and many entities have similar targets. It is easier for some to implement these targets, although it's challenging for everyone. But at least for some industries, some countries are better endowed or it's more aligned with their other interests, whereas other industries or other regions are, for them, implementing such targets is really difficult or will result in economic losses. In order for science to influence the process of the parties negotiating with regard to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it's really important that the scientific results were arrived at through an inclusive process. If everyone feels they share, they co-own the findings, it will be much easier to arrive at decisions, to incorporate those findings into any decisions. If the science is mostly resulted from work of, let's say, white global north males or just rich institutions in certain parts of the world, this will be much more challenging to really incorporate and owned by the negotiators. So inclusivity is tremendously important. This is challenging because even though, for example, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have been trying to be as inclusive as possible, to have a diversity of authors, but clearly institutions who are better resourced have more science, more results, more publications. They're able to devote more time and effort to certain processes, whereas those sometimes in the Global South will have less capacity. So certainly all these stumbling blocks will have to and continually have to be overcome in order for also the negotiations and UNFCCC processes to even better be able to embrace scientific findings. So clearly there is still a major gap between the ambition that we need, which is based on science, and implementation or where we should be. And definitely science as well as city networks and other organizations can definitely help reduce this gap. How? I believe the most important task is to really identify why else we need to do this. It's clear that climate change and climate action will not be any time in the close future in the vast majority of the world the highest priority. So we always need to see where climate priorities align with other priorities. For example, with jobs, with livable cities, with economy, with health, with productivity, competitiveness. There are many different things that people and governments and cities and companies want. How we can incorporate climate action into those targets and those purposes already. And that's exactly where science can help, looking at the co-benefit, the synergies. And urban networks, such as ICLEI, are fundamental for this purpose because most action actually happens on the ground in cities, by cities, and for cities. Also, cities can move faster often than national governments.